Marcus Williams had been riding the same bus route to work for 3 years, but today felt different. The 34-year-old veteran sat quietly in his usual seat near the back, clutching a worn duffel bag that contained everything he owned. His clothes were clean but faded, his shoes had seen better days, and his quiet demeanor often made other passengers assume he was just another struggling person trying to get by. The morning rush hour crowd was particularly rowdy today. A group of college students had claimed the middle section of the bus, laughing loudly and making jokes about everything around them. Their leader, a young man named Tyler, wore expensive sneakers and designer clothes that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month at his part-time security job. Marcus tried to focus on the passing scenery, but he could feel their eyes on him. He had learned to ignore stares and whispers over the years. People saw his simple appearance and made assumptions. They didn't know about his service record, his sacrifices, or the nightmares that still visited him some nights. He had learned that explaining himself rarely changed anyone's mind anyway. The bus hit a pothole, and Marcus's bag slipped from his lap onto the floor. As he bent to retrieve it, Tyler noticed the movement and nudged his friends. They had been looking for entertainment, and the quiet man with the old bag seemed like an easy target. Tyler stood up and walked over with a smirk that his friends recognized all too well. "Hey there, buddy," Tyler said loudly enough for half the bus to hear. "That's quite the bag you've got there. Looks like it's been through a war or something." His friends snickered at what they thought was a clever joke, not realizing how accurate their leader's words actually were. Marcus looked up calmly and simply nodded, hoping the young man would lose interest and return to his seat. But Tyler was just getting started. He had an audience now, and several other passengers had turned to watch the interaction. The bus driver glanced in his rear-view mirror but continued driving, probably hoping the situation would resolve itself. "Come on, don't be shy," Tyler continued, his voice dripping with fake friendliness. "We're all friends here. Why don't you show us what's in that mysterious bag of yours? Bet it's nothing too exciting, right, guys?" His friends laughed and encouraged him to continue, completely unaware that they were about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with unwanted attention, but he remained silent. He had faced much worse than a group of bored college kids, and he knew that engaging would only make the situation worse. The bus was still 20 minutes from his stop, and he just wanted to get through the ride without incident. But Tyler interpreted Marcus's silence as weakness, and the attention from other passengers only fueled his confidence. He reached down toward the bag, his intentions clear. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something was about to happen but unsure whether they should intervene. The morning sun streamed through the bus windows, casting long shadows across the aisle where two very different worlds were about to collide, in a way that none of them could have predicted. Tyler's hand moved toward the bag despite Marcus's obvious discomfort. The veteran's jaw tightened, but years of discipline kept him from reacting aggressively. He had learned to control his responses even when every instinct told him to defend himself and his belongings. "Please don't touch my bag," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady but firm. The simplicity of his request seemed to amuse Tyler even more. The college student looked back at his friends with an exaggerated expression of surprise, as if Marcus had said something hilarious. "Oh, it talks," Tyler announced to his audience. "And it's got manners, too. How cute." The other passengers were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but the social dynamics of public transportation meant that most people preferred to look away, rather than get involved in someone else's problem. An elderly woman near the front of the bus turned around with a disapproving look, but Tyler was too caught up in his performance to notice. His friends were laughing and recording parts of the interaction on their phones, treating the whole thing like entertainment for their social media accounts. Marcus carefully pulled his bag closer to his chest, but Tyler was persistent. The young man had committed to this course of action in front of his friends, and backing down now would damage his reputation as the group's ringleader. He had no idea that the quiet man in front of him had faced down armed insurgents in places where backing down meant death. "Come on, man, we're just having some fun," Tyler said, reaching for the bag again. "What's the big deal? You hiding something illegal in there? Maybe we should call the cops and have them check it out." His threat was meant to be intimidating, but Marcus had nothing to hide and wasn't afraid of law enforcement. The bus made another stop, and a few passengers got off while others climbed aboard. The new arrivals immediately sensed the tension in the air, and some moved toward the front of the bus to avoid whatever was happening in the back. The driver finally spoke up, his voice carrying over the intercom system. "Keep it down back there, folks. This is public transportation, not a playground." But his warning was half-hearted, and Tyler barely acknowledged it. The college student was too focused on his target to worry about the driver's disapproval. Marcus felt the weight of everyone's attention, and memories of other confrontations began to surface. Not the dangerous ones from his military service, but the countless smaller battles he had fought since returning home. The job interviews where his gaps in employment raised questions he couldn't answer honestly. The apartment applications that were mysteriously denied. The casual assumptions people made about his intelligence, his worth, his potential. But this felt different somehow. These young people weren't just ignoring him or dismissing him. They were actively trying to humiliate him for their own amusement. And something about that level of deliberate cruelty touched a nerve that Marcus usually kept well buried. Tyler made another grab for the bag, and this time his fingers actually touched the worn canvas material. Marcus pulled it away quickly, but not before Tyler felt something hard and structured inside. The college student's curiosity was now genuinely piqued, and his performance for his friends became secondary to his desire to know what Marcus was protecting so carefully. "Definitely hiding something," Tyler announced, loud enough for the entire bus to hear. "Nobody gets that protective over dirty laundry." His friends laughed, but some of the other passengers were starting to look annoyed with the ongoing disturbance. The situation escalated quickly when Tyler decided that Marcus's resistance was just making the game more interesting. He moved closer, invading the veteran's personal space in a way that would have been threatening to anyone, but especially to someone who had learned to read body language as a matter of survival. "Look, buddy," Tyler said, his tone shifting from playful to demanding. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just show us what's in the bag, and we'll leave you alone. Keep being difficult, and this is going to get a lot worse for you." Marcus looked up at the young man towering over him, and felt a familiar cold calm settle over his thoughts. This was the mental state that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, the place his mind went when civilians were in danger, and split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. But this wasn't a war zone, and these weren't enemy combatants. They were just ignorant kids who had no idea what they were doing. "I've asked you politely to leave me alone," Marcus said, his voice taking on a tone that made several nearby passengers look up sharply. There was something in his inflection that suggested Tyler might want to reconsider his approach, but the college student was too caught up in his own momentum to recognize the warning signs. Instead, Tyler interpreted Marcus's controlled response as fear, which only encouraged him further. He gestured to his friends, who moved closer to form a loose circle around Marcus's seat. The other passengers were now openly staring, and some were pulling out their phones to record what they expected to be Tyler's complete humiliation of the quiet man. "Last chance," Tyler announced dramatically. "Hand over the bag or we take it ourselves." One of his friends, emboldened by Tyler's apparent success, reached over the seat to grab one of the bag's straps from behind. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and those who were watching closely might have noticed his lips moving slightly, as if he was counting or reciting something to himself. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed. The resignation was gone, replaced by alertness that seemed almost predatory. But before Marcus could respond, Tyler made his move. The college student lunged forward and managed to grab the bag with both hands, pulling it away from Marcus with enough force to nearly knock the veteran off balance. Tyler stumbled backward with his prize, grinning triumphantly at his friends who cheered as if he had just accomplished something significant. "Let's see what we've got here," Tyler announced, holding the bag up like a trophy. Marcus stood up, slowly, his full height now apparent to everyone around him. Even in his worn civilian clothes, there was something about his posture and bearing that suggested Tyler might have made a serious mistake. "Give me back my bag," Marcus said quietly, but his words carried an authority that cut through the noise and laughter. Several passengers who had been enjoying the show suddenly looked uncomfortable, as if they were beginning to realize they might be witnessing something different than what they had expected. Tyler, however, was too committed to back down now. He had the bag, He had an audience, and he was determined to see this through to whatever end awaited. He began working at the zipper, his friends gathering around to get a good view of whatever embarrassing contents they were about to reveal. "Let's see what kind of secrets our mysterious friend has been hiding," Tyler said with a grin, finally managing to get the zipper open. The first thing visible was what appeared to be carefully folded fabric in a dark color, which only seemed to confirm Tyler's assumption that he was about to expose some homeless person's meager possessions. But as he reached inside to pull out the contents, his expression began to change. The fabric felt different than he had expected, heavier and more structured. There was something formal about the way it was folded, something that spoke of precision and care that didn't match his assumptions about its owner. Tyler's confident grin began to fade as he pulled the dark fabric from the bag. What emerged wasn't the collection of random personal items he had expected to find. Instead, he found himself holding a pristinely maintained military dress uniform, complete with sharp creases that spoke of countless hours of careful attention. The laughter from his friends died away as they saw what Tyler was holding. Even from a distance, it was clear that this wasn't just any old clothes. The uniform was immaculate, treated with the kind of respect that most people reserved for their most precious possessions. The dark blue fabric seemed to absorb the light streaming through the bus windows, giving it an almost somber dignity. "What the hell?" one of Tyler's friends whispered, but Tyler was too focused on the uniform to respond. As he held it up, additional items began to fall from the bag onto the bus floor. A pair of polished black dress shoes that gleamed despite their age. White gloves that had been folded with military precision. A cap with a distinctive emblem that caught the light as it rolled under a nearby seat. Marcus stepped forward, his movements controlled but purposeful. "Put it down," he said quietly, and this time even Tyler could hear the steel beneath the words. The college student was beginning to realize that he had made a serious error in judgment, but he was holding the uniform in front of a dozen witnesses and couldn't figure out how to gracefully retreat from the situation he had created. The other passengers were silent now, watching the scene unfold with the kind of uncomfortable attention usually reserved for car accidents. Several people had lowered their phones, suddenly realizing that whatever they had thought they were recording was turning into something very different. Tyler looked more closely at the uniform in his hands and noticed details that made his stomach begin to sink. The ribbons and decorations on the chest weren't costume jewelry or replicas. They had the weight and appearance of real military honors, arranged with the kind of precision that could only come from someone who understood their significance. But it was the patch on the sleeve that made Tyler's blood run cold. The distinctive emblem of the Tomb Guard was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at, and Tyler's father had been in the military long enough to teach his son to recognize the most elite units. The 21 steps, the changing of the guard, the absolute precision required to earn the privilege of watching over America's unknown soldiers. "Oh God," Tyler breathed. Finally understanding what he had done, he looked up at Marcus with new eyes, seeing past the worn civilian clothes to the bearing and composure that had been there all along. This wasn't some random person he could mock for his friend's entertainment. This was someone who had earned the right to guard the most sacred site in American military tradition. Marcus's voice was steady when he spoke, but everyone on the bus could hear the emotion barely contained beneath the surface. "That uniform represents 3 years of my life," he said quietly. "Every morning at dawn, every changing of the guard, every moment of silence for soldiers whose names we'll never know." The silence on the bus was complete now, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the occasional sound of traffic outside. Tyler's friends had backed away from him, suddenly wanting to distance themselves from what was happening. The other passengers were staring openly now, but their expressions had changed from amusement to something approaching awe. Tyler's hands were shaking slightly as he continued to hold the uniform. He could see other items in the bag now. Photographs, medals, documents that clearly belonged to someone whose service record was anything but ordinary. The weight of his mistake was settling on him like a physical burden, and he could feel the judgment of everyone around him. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that only Tyler could hear his next words. "That uniform has been to Arlington Cemetery more times than you've probably been to church," he said quietly. "It's been worn in honor ceremonies for presidents and generals. It's been present for the burial of heroes whose sacrifices made your freedom to mock strangers on a bus possible. The color had completely drained from Tyler's face as the full impact of Marcus's words sank in. He looked down at the uniform in his hands as if it had suddenly become radioactive, understanding for the first time that he wasn't just holding old clothes. He was holding a piece of American history, something that represented sacrifices and honor that he couldn't begin to comprehend. Marcus reached out slowly, his movements deliberate and respectful even in his anger. Tyler didn't resist as the veteran carefully took the uniform back, handling it with the reverence that Tyler was beginning to understand it deserved. The other passengers watched in complete silence as Marcus began to fold the uniform with the same precision with which it had been stored. I wore this uniform while standing guard over soldiers who died in wars you've only read about in history books, Marcus continued, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent bus. I've stood in rain, snow, and 100-degree heat, making sure that their sacrifice was never forgotten. Every thread in this fabric represents a promise that their service mattered. Tyler's friends had moved even further away now, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but associated with what their leader had done. Some of them were looking at their phones, probably deleting the videos they had recorded earlier and hoping no one would ever connect them to this moment. An elderly man near the front of the bus stood up and began walking toward them. His movements were careful, suggesting either age or old injuries, but his bearing was unmistakably military. When he reached Marcus, he stopped and executed a precise salute that made Tyler flinch. "Tomb guard?" the older man asked quietly, and Marcus nodded once. The elderly veteran's expression hardened as he looked at Tyler, and the college student found himself wishing he could disappear into the floor of the bus. "Son," the older man said to Tyler, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, "do you have any idea what this man had to do to earn the right to wear that uniform? The physical requirements alone would break most people, but the mental discipline required is something that maybe one person in 10,000 possesses." Tyler wanted to apologize, wanted to explain that it had all been a joke, that he hadn't known, that he would never have done what he did if he had understood, but the words wouldn't come. He stood there holding the empty bag, feeling the weight of everyone's stares and beginning to understand that some mistakes couldn't be undone with a simple apology. Marcus carefully placed the uniform back in his bag, along with the shoes, gloves, and cap that had fallen to the floor. As he worked, he continued speaking, his words directed at Tyler but meant for everyone on the bus to hear. "The tomb of the unknown soldier is guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of weather conditions," Marcus explained. "We march 21 steps, turn and wait 21 seconds, then march back. Every movement is precise, every gesture has meaning. We do this to honor soldiers whose families never got to say goodbye, never got to know where their sons and daughters fell." A woman near the middle of the bus had begun crying quietly, and several other passengers were wiping their eyes. The atmosphere on the bus had completely transformed from entertainment to something approaching a memorial service. Tyler finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry," he managed to say, but the words sounded pathetically inadequate even to him. "I didn't know. I thought you were just what?" Marcus asked, looking up from his careful repacking. "Just some homeless person you could humiliate for fun? Just someone whose dignity didn't matter because you assumed I was less important than you?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, and Tyler realized that this moment was going to stay with him for the rest of his life. He would never again be able to look at a stranger and make assumptions about their worth or their story, because he would always remember the uniform and the man who wore it. The bus came to Tyler's stop, but he didn't move. His friends shuffled past him toward the exit, clearly eager to escape the situation they had helped create. One of them paused long enough to whisper, "We'll catch the next bus," but Tyler barely heard him. He was still staring at Marcus, trying to process everything that had just happened. Marcus finished securing his bag and sat back down, his movement still carrying the precise economy of motion that Tyler was beginning to recognize as military bearing. The elderly veteran who had saluted earlier was still standing nearby, and he placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Thank you for your service," the older man said simply, and Marcus nodded once in acknowledgement. The phrase that had become almost meaningless through overuse suddenly carried genuine weight in the silence of the bus. Tyler's stop was receding behind them now, but he made no effort to signal for the next one. He was paralyzed by the magnitude of his mistake, and the realization that he had spent the last 20 minutes humiliating someone who had dedicated years of his life to honoring fallen soldiers. "The funny thing is," Marcus said quietly, apparently addressing Tyler directly for the first time, "I wasn't even supposed to be on this bus today. My car broke down yesterday, and I'm heading to a job interview at a security company. I brought the uniform because they wanted to see my credentials, proof of my experience." Tyler felt another wave of nausea wash over him as he realized he had potentially interfered with Marcus's attempt to find stable employment. The job interview that might have been Marcus's chance to get back on his feet had been preceded by public humiliation that could have shattered anyone's confidence. "I want to make this right," Tyler said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been since the uniform emerged from the bag. "Please tell me how I can make this right." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, studying the young man's face with the same intensity he had once used to scan for threats in hostile territory. "You want to make it right?" he asked. "Then remember this moment. Remember what you learned today about making assumptions about people you don't know." But Tyler wasn't satisfied with that answer. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly, and after a moment he turned the screen toward Marcus. It was a social media post with a photo of the uniform and a lengthy caption describing what had happened, taking full responsibility for his actions and explaining what he had learned about respect and service. "I'm posting this everywhere," Tyler said. "My friends will see it, my classmates, my family. Everyone will know what I did and what you taught me." He paused, then added, "And I'm including information about your job interview. If any of my contacts know anyone in security or related fields, maybe something good can come out of this." Marcus read the post carefully, noting the genuine remorse in Tyler's words and the detailed explanation of the significance of the tomb guard. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, and it showed that Tyler understood the gravity of what had happened. The bus reached Marcus's stop, and he stood to leave. As he moved toward the exit, several passengers stood as well, creating an informal honor guard for his departure. The elderly veteran saluted again, and this time several other passengers followed suit, even those who had never served in the military. Tyler watched through the window as Marcus walked away, the worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder with the same dignity he had carried it onto the bus. The young man's phone was already buzzing with responses to his post, and he could see that the story was beginning to spread beyond his immediate circle of friends. Later that evening, Tyler would learn that Marcus had gotten the job, partly because Tyler's viral post had reached someone who knew the hiring manager. The company was impressed not just by Marcus's credentials, but by the character he had shown during the bus incident and the respect he had earned from complete strangers. Tyler never rode that bus route again, but he never forgot the lesson he learned that day. The uniform that he had thought represented nothing more than old clothes had taught him that everyone carries invisible stories of sacrifice, service, and dignity that deserve respect regardless of appearances. He had gone looking for entertainment at someone else's expense, and instead discovered the difference between mockery and honor, between assumption and understanding.